Hello and welcome to Quadriga. Trump and Europe, partners or rivals? That's our title today on Quadriga. Europe is still reeling from the shock. As a candidate, Donald Trump had bashed NATO, criticized Europe and Angela Merkel. So what can be expected now? What's next? In his victory speech, Donald Trump's tone was more conciliatory. He pledged to be a president for all Americans and told the world community that he plans to seek common ground with all countries, saying he wants partnership, not conflict. Is this a new Trump? And that's what we want to talk about with three people who follow transatlantic relations very closely and have been watching this election and its aftermath. It's a pleasure to welcome Susan Neiman. She's a U.S.-American philosopher and head of the Einstein Forum based in Potsdam. And she says, I'm reluctant to make fascist comparisons. Trump's victory is extremely frightening. Europe must now take on the responsibility for democratic and social values. Stefan is a lawyer and a German-American political consultant who was a member of the Republican Party. He has left it. He says an evil aging clown and yellow-haired fascist apprentice has been elected 45th president. If we're here to see the world in 4 years' time, it will surely have become unrecognizable. And Andreas Kluth covers Germany for The Economist. He says Trump's victory presents a huge risk for the world. European leaders should try to contain the worst instincts by making plans for their own security without America. Susan, let me start out by asking you about the connection between Trump and evil, because your most recent and widely praised book is called Evil in Modern Thought, and it describes the question posed by evil as this: how can human beings behave in ways that so thoroughly violate both reasonable and rational norms? By that description, would you call Donald Trump evil?
Absolutely. It's not, by the way, my most recent book, but there's a new edition that came out last year. I think he violates... Well, the interesting thing about Trump, if one likes, is that he has no norms that are recognizable. He cares literally about gold. It's interesting. It's not just money. It's gold. One has no evidence, other than he also likes blonde, long-legged, large-breasted women that also seems to be connected with gold. He seems to care about nothing else whatsoever. It's an absence of any moral compass.
Stefan, you were a member of the Republican Party. You have left it. And as I understand it, you did not vote in this election. But I have to ask you, by not voting at all, didn't you help to pave the way for a victory by Donald Trump?
Well, the thing with this election is that there was no real choice. And if we look at many Republican voters or potential Republican voters, they had a hard time choosing as well. And you're right about leaving the party. I did so without delay after Trump was elected. I never endorsed him in any way, and can't do that in the long run. I basically did that heavy-heartedly because I'm not prepared to take questions on him in the future.
Okay, you will have to take a few questions here, but as an observer. Andreas Kluth, the pollsters and the media got it very wrong when it comes to Trump. And one could even go further and say that with our 24/7 coverage of Trump, we helped give him free publicity that may have perhaps supported his rise to power. What's your reaction to all of this? Are you doing a bit of soul-searching even as a journalist?
Well, I think The Economist was not the medium in which that was part of his rise. I think that was more the television networks. But you're absolutely right. And in fact, you were kinder than you needed to be. We got it wrong as a media elite. For the second time in a couple of months. The first one was Brexit. And those are in some ways comparable because I think in both cases it is true that we as a cosmopolitan elite and as media intellectuals seem to be blind to large parts of the various countries in the West that I suppose we don't get out to enough, or maybe that don't want to open themselves up to us, and we keep getting it wrong. So there's reason to do a lot of soul searching.
Stefan Prustevik, to what degree do you see the Republican Party itself as an enabler? People like the Speaker in the House of Representatives, Paul Ryan, did a lot of twisting and turning, trying to hold on to those core voters who were supporting Trump, while at the same time not alienating moderate voters. But would you say that they were also facilitators of what you clearly feel is a rise to power by someone who is similar to a fascist?
I do not. I mean, Paul Ryan is the last person I would really blame, or lots of Congress people. I see the main enabling factor with the party itself, with the party apparatus, that namely the chairman Reince Priebus, who rallied. We had quite a few conversations with Republicans all over the place before the elections, and there was clearly something that meant rallying, that meant soldiering on behind Trump. And I found this wrong right from the start.
But Ryan was one of those.
Oh, you haven't talked to Priebus, probably.
No, I haven't talked to either of them. I did, however, follow what they did.
Yeah, of course. No,
and
I don't.
There were brief condemnations every time he crossed another red line, but no one disavowed him. And there I have to agree with Melinda a bit. It was a bad choice, but it's not true that there was no choice. My son, who bitterly, my kids were Sanders supporters, as was I, was raging the night of the election. Why must I live in a world in which there's no better choice than this? But he bit the bullet, and he's, making various metaphors. Is it apocalypse or apocalypse without, or, whatever. He did vote, as many people finally did, vote for Hillary with distaste, but because the stakes were extremely high. And that was true of many young people, many older people. And if one looks at the percentage of people who went for a third party, much less those who just didn't show up, one would see that this could have been averted.
Clearly, at any rate, many of us, pollsters, media, politicians, normal citizens, clearly we underestimated the level of disaffection and anger, rage on both sides of what is proving to be a very, very bitter divide. We are hearing voices of rage now from the protesters in streets across the U.S. protesting against Trump's victory, and clearly showing that they now feel it's not their country that they recognize in this election. Susan Neiman, can you understand those protesters when you see people going out on the streets? Or would you say, hey, this is not the peaceful transition to an elected representatives that represents our democracy at its best?
I understand them so well that I've decided, after many, many years of living in Germany, to apply for German citizenship, because I would like to be a European. I feel that the United States in this election has absented itself from the core values that are important to me. So I do understand them. I felt, and I'd be there myself if I were there, I felt that both Obama's and Clinton's statements were a noble plea, no civil war, please, because everyone was talking about that. In particular, the Trump supporters were talking about bringing out their guns if the election went the other way. So that was a plea. And I suppose civil war is not an option. But I completely understand anyone who wants to say, this is not a democracy, this is not the America that I know and cherish.
Andreas Kluth, our topic is Trump and Europe. So one has to ask, this polarization that we are witnessing in the U.S., those protests on the streets, the angry, angry voices of the Trump supporters, Are they relevant for Europe, or would you say this is a domestic political problem that the U.S. needs to try to get a grip on, but frankly, it's not something that's directly a problem for Europe itself?
I think it's very relevant for Europe because I think there are several overlapping themes that we're seeing this year. Polarization has mainly been an American thing. It comes out of a two-party system. Here in Germany, for instance, and a lot of European parliamentary democracies with many parties, it's been there's been no polarization so far. If anything, political power is won in the middle with grand coalitions of the sort that we're seeing. But because there was so much of it here, that left room on the fringes for this kind of polarization on the street that you're seeing. And I think we're usually America, from everything blue jeans onward, was about 10 years ahead in most social trends. And we seem to be importing that to Europe, and it's now here. So we have Pegida marches, we have Alternative for Germany. I think in France they're well ahead, Poland, Hungary, all around us, Austria. So on the streets are polarized. The politics here isn't yet, although it's becoming that because we have populist fringes now. They just haven't had very charismatic representatives yet in Germany. As America has in Trump and Sanders. But it's just a matter of time before they get those, and then the polarization will enter politics as well.
Stefan, you referred to this charismatic representative in the U.S., I think, as a yellow-haired clown or fascist.
Aging.
Yeah, aging yellow-haired clown and a fascist apprentice, if I'm not mistaken. So probably I scarcely need to pose the question, but nonetheless, he gave quite a conciliatory concession, quite a conciliatory victory speech. He used all the right words, talked about the peaceful transition of power, being president for all Americans. So can we maybe see a different Donald Trump emerge from this, someone who can heal those divisions?
I don't really see this. I would have liked to see him giving a conciliatory concession speech, for that matter, but no. What he basically did, that looked pretty much scripted. That's one thing.
Totally. And Ivanka wrote it.
Yeah, that might well be. But secondly, it is that he did one of the basics of being a member of any kind of Western society. I mean, if somebody's got their birthday, I would go congratulate and give them a present. And about 99% of people bring my condolences if something happened. That was very normal. I mean, it was the least to be expected. I don't see this as a pattern for his behavior.
So he's simply following a convention and nothing more.
Basically, yeah.
That someone else wrote for him, that he managed to read out without making mistakes, and that nothing in his past suggests that he takes seriously. The point about the peaceful transition, Melinda, you know, I have been wondering about the following, and none of us really know what's about to happen. But why are Democrats always the one who give in to a peaceful transition? Just like in 2000, Hillary still won the popular vote, you know? He does not have a popular majority, and yet no one is raising any questions about how someone whom every serious political leader has said is not qualified by either knowledge, curiosity, or character to aspire to this kind of an office. And everybody's, you know, the Democrats are all saying, oh, well, let's not rile up the country, just as Gore did in 2000. And I wonder.
I want to bring us back to Trump and Europe, but let me just ask you this, because all of you are making some pretty dire statements in regard to Trump and his potential to stir things up. Andreas Kluth, do you see him as somebody who single-handedly could deconstruct American democracy? Because, of course, that is very relevant to America's friends and allies.
Well, there are sort of two aspects to him now that he's in office. One is domestically, in America, are the checks and balances? Is the Constitution of Hamilton and Madison strong enough to contain a Caesar? That's what they had in mind when they drafted is there will be populists, and out of that will come a Caesar, and we have to be ready for that. So the system will be tested. I think that in America the system is strong enough. Remember that an American president doesn't have as much power as outside of America you would think. Inside of America, he does have a lot of power outside of America and foreign policy. And there, it's much more interesting, and I thought it was very good what Foreign Minister Steinmeier of Germany said on television yesterday, the real issue there, the danger, is that we have no idea what he's going to do, because, frankly, I think he's never thought about foreign policy seriously in his life until now. And one of the memes that's been going around since yesterday among us in the media elite browbeating ourselves is, we took him literally but not seriously, whereas his voters took him seriously but not literally. And so now I'm wondering, and I think that's true, but now if we're supposed to sit here and not take anything he said literally, and I think he is a clown, and a lot of he says things for effect, maybe doesn't mean them. That includes probably his acceptance speech yesterday. That still means we have no idea what he would do. I think he's easily provoked. It comes down to temperament, but he has no, as far as we know, conceptual framework for how to approach foreign policy or Europe.
So let's see if we can read a few of the tea leaves. We have a short report, at least on some of what we might expect when it comes to foreign policy, if we do take him literally. Let's take a look.
On NATO, Donald Trump would not necessarily back NATO allies. Those who do not contribute to the alliance should not expect support from the U.S. On Syria, Trump has promised to bomb ISIS militants and has also called for sending in ground troops. But he has no plans to go after Assad. On the world economy, Trump is against free trade and believes foreign competition is bad for the U.S. economy. The planned European-American trade deal TTIP will have little chance. On climate change, Trump does not believe in global warming. He plans to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. And his relationship to Germany? Trump considers Chancellor Angela Merkel a disappointment. He has called her stance on Europe's immigration crisis a disaster. The question is, will he implement his controversial agenda?
So, Stefan Pustovic, take the first stab at that question. Will he implement those things that we just saw, all of them mentioned in his so-called basic speech on foreign policy that he gave at the end of last spring as a candidate? But you've all said he's a clown, he may not mean what he says. What do you think he would do? What do you think he wouldn't do?
Well, I presume that he has some basic ideas, whether they're policy-led or not, but at least he might have made up his mind what he wants. So probably these things as building the wall.
To Mexico.
To Mexico, that is. Talking or even negotiating with Putin on a brotherly level. How do I put that? These things will happen, and everything.
What about trade, globalization? That was a huge part of his campaign. Would you expect him to really begin something like a trade war?
Lots of people say he of all people was the one who killed TTIP. Now that might well happen.
Transatlantic trade agreement.
So that this is not going to pass. So that's quite an interesting aspect as regards the leftist activists in Europe who didn't want to have it. Now they have somebody who put it away for them or did away with it. So that might happen. What else is doable, particularly as regards Asia, China for that matter? I'm not too sure whether he can contain U.S. trade in a way that he really got the village perspective on that.
Andreas Kluth, what's The Economist saying about it? Do they think we will really see now an era of protectionism and trade war beginning under President Trump?
Well, again, we don't know how literally to take him, but I think I agree. I mean, certain things from his point of view are either low-hanging fruit, given that he has a Republican Congress to work with, which Obama never did. Domestically, that would be to repeal Obamacare. They're going to get together, they're going to do that. I think on trade and on the Mexican wall, he's brought that up so much that he has no way out. He has to show them something. Otherwise, on a lot of other things.
So what would that mean exactly in trade? Not signing the transatlantic trade partnership, okay,
the transatlantic partnership was dead already.
Yeah.
And it was dead from many sides. The left and right populists in Germany must love Trump because seems to love everything they love, which is to destroy the transatlantic trade agreement and to shake hands with Putin and talk to him instead of telling him to back off of Eastern Europe. So they must get along great. But no,
can he really afford to start a trade war with China?
Well, can he afford not to? And how would it look? You see, you stumble into these things the way we did in the 1920s. In the interwar period, we stumbled into rounds of escalation that led to a trade war. It's pretty fragile, the world economy right now anyway. I mean, our hope is that he backs off and that there's a lot of pressure on him now. I was going to say the bigger issue, I think the more frightening one, is the NATO and Russia aspect rather than trade, because TTIP doesn't exist yet. Okay, but he's more interested in the Trans-Pacific trade partnership for the moment. That's the one at the rallies that he brought up, and in NAFTA with Mexico and Canada. So we'll see. That's sort of a test case. TTIP was dead already, I think, and is not. We won't know it's gone because we didn't have it.
Susan Neiman, so on relations with Europe, on the NATO allies, one thing that Trump has said is that you have to see everything as a transaction. He's written this great book, The Art of the Deal.
He didn't write it, of course. We all know
his ghostwriter wrote the book, The Art of the Deal. And he says somebody who wants to get somewhere, including in politics, has to be ready to get up and walk away from the table. And essentially, he's threatened to do that vis-a-vis NATO. So what do you think is to be expected when it really comes down to it? Can he afford to send those NATO allies packing?
Look, Melinda, we are all in agreement that nobody saw this coming. None of us talking heads, none of us media intellectuals, none of us journalists, whatever. My own belief, and it was rather ironic for somebody who came of age in the Vietnam War era, was that the Pentagon was going to save us because last spring a number of generals said publicly, which is outrageous, under a commander-in-chief Trump, they would not serve, they would retire early, okay? So I thought, we're safe, right? At least there. So let's start from the fact that none of us got this one right, and that it's a bit early to start predicting what will happen. I think, however, we can say something about what ought to happen and what Europe ought to do. I was immensely happy to see an ex-Republican use the word fascist. In my statement, I said, I'm careful with fascist analogies, but he's very dangerous.
You told us he's evil.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we ought to really remember that Winston Churchill in the early 30s praised Hitler, and the Nazis got a lot of mileage out of it. He thought a strong leader was a good thing. I think we need to not play down how dangerous he is. I think the Chancellor's statement was terrific, superb yesterday. And until last September, I was never a big supporter of the Chancellor, but I think she's acting on principle, and her statement about values was absolutely correct. I hope every European leader follows her, and that Europe as a whole, those of us who are in the public intellectual business, keeps awake for what comes next, because we didn't know this was going to happen.
So the Chancellor's statement, for those who did not perhaps hear it amongst our audience, essentially reminded all of us that Germany and the U.S. have a close partnership because of the shared values that they have, and reminded us that it needs to continue on that basis.
The subtlety and the genius of the statement is there's a diplomatic affront embedded in subtle language, which is very Merkelian. She spelled out the values.
Exactly.
She reminded...
And that's never happened before.
She reminded Donald Trump.
A foreign leader. She said, and the values are respect for human dignity for all people, all races, all... So, there was a long list. And
it was fantastic.
Basically, she read back to him his campaign speeches. I thought it was very
reminded him
remarkable.
what he needs to be respecting. So let me ask you this, because we are coming to the end of our time. Yeah. The question that we posed in our title was Trump and Europe, partners or rivals. She was reminding Donald Trump that partnership needs to be based on these shared values. Stefan, what do you think? Where are we heading? Some in the media have said this represents the beginning of a new era. The Europe can no longer count on the United States. Is it really so drastic?
For the time being, we have to presume that, because with somebody who changes his mind twice a day, to say the least, how can you predict what the policies will be? So Europe, at least for the time being, probably has to at least bank on going on its own and see what's going to happen.
Let's not forget she was also speaking to Europe. She was both speaking to Donald Trump and you know, with a clarity that you never see in diplomatic statements, but she was also speaking to other Europeans.
So what do you think, partners or rivals going forward from this point?
I think it very much depends on... Oh, God, it depends on a lot of things that I don't think we can predict. But I think Europe has to be a bulwark of these shared values and has to recognize its responsibility.
Andreas Klupp, very briefly, partnership, rivalry, or something in between?
It's a new era. We can't say anymore that we're unambiguous partners, but my hope is that that will prevail, that all the forces will turn him that way.
Thank you very much to all of you for being with us, and thanks to all of you out there for tuning in. See you soon.